Hello everyone, let's discuss today's The Hindu editorial page. The first article is "The World Needs Blue Helmets Who Act as Blue Helmets." In this article, the writer says that the United Nations, UN, has a strong commitment to peaceful dispute settlement, but it has also been accused of being a bystander in cases of aggression and breaches of peace threatening international security. This is due to the collective conscience of the world, which must work as the weapon of the powerless. The UN has established peace in many theaters in 7 decades of peacekeeping, such as in Cambodia, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, Angola, Timor-Leste, Liberia, and Kosovo. However, there have been instances where the UN was accused of being a bystander, unwilling or unable to protect non-combatants and vulnerable sections, especially women and children. The UN has frittered away the dividends of its enforceable peacekeeping between 2006 and 2020, and has been reduced to a bystander status again in the ongoing conflict in West Asia and the war in Ukraine. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Hamas-led massacre of non-combatants in Israel, the UN response in both theaters has failed to call out the perpetrator in no uncertain terms and take decisive action in protecting civilian lives. This has happened despite having a 1,400-strong UN military and police forces at its disposal, as battle-ready infantry battalions and ASA's standing capacity at its logistics hub in Brindisi, Italy. Extraordinary situations demand extraordinary interventions, and the fact that contributing member countries have committed these forces to not just maintain but also to enforce peace implies their consent to protect civilians regardless of the theater. Blue helmets must act impartially and decisively as seen in Kosovo and Timor-Leste with legitimacy to use reasonable force. A deployment of similar numbers in a similar-sized geographical area of Israel-Gaza West Bank would have contained the colossal loss of lives that has followed and is making this theater a killing field with mounting civilian casualties. There's a need for UNSC reform to avoid such genocides in future by swift deployment and having a decisive role for the Blue Helmets. The case for reform of the Security Council rests on a two-pronged approach. The expansion of permanent membership of the Security Council to include India, by virtue of it being the most vibrant voice of the Global South, and South Africa, for long overdue representation from Africa. Once such a division of votes is in favor of peace operations to thwart hostilities, the deployment of UN standing troops or shifting troops between missions should be enabled under Chapters 7 and 8 of the UN Charter, with full executive powers to the UN military and police commanders on the ground. The next article is "Working Toward a Meaningful Victims Register" in Bastari. In this article, the writer says that on September 20th, 2024, the Union Home Minister met with 55 people affected by Naxalite violence and left-wing extremism hit areas of Chhattisgarh. The Bastar division of Chhattisgarh is the ground zero of the current phase of left-wing extremism activities, where most recent and successful tactical operations have been conducted. The government's approach to deal with left-wing extremism has been to address the challenge in a holistic manner, including security, development, ensuring the rights of local communities, and improvements in governance and public perception management. Victory identity is not a monolith in conflict zones, and Bastar is no different. 2 main categories of victims include those who have suffered at the hands of Maoists and those who have suffered at the hands of the state, including security forces and the criminal justice system. Another agency that victimized the tribal community was the vigilante army called the Salwa Judum during the middle years of the first decade of this century. Victimization as a result of structural violence vis-a-vis tribal communities has been an ongoing process since colonial times and through the post-independence era. The initiative to identify victims and register the details in the Victims Register has tremendous potential to alleviate the plight of tribal communities who find themselves sandwiched between the Maoists and the state. The Victims Register has been tried in more than a dozen countries as a conflict resolution or peace-building effort, playing a major role in resolving the deep-rooted left-wing extremism insurgency in Colombia. However, the exercise of identifying victims should be in the spirit of truth and reconciliation and agnostic to the nature of the perpetrators who carried out victimization. The ground rules of the Victims Register experiment should be based on trust and provide victims and their families with a benefit of doubt when they tell their stories. This measure will be an impactful conviction-building measure and is bound to expand the support base of the state against the Maoists. The next article is "Over the Borderline." The agreement between India and China opens new opportunities. In this article, the writer says that China's announcement of an agreement to resolve its 4-year military standoff with India is welcome news, as it opens up possibilities for bilateral ties. Since April 2020, when China suddenly transgressed along the line of actual control, (LAC), followed by India's counter-deployment, bilateral relations had ground to a halt. Anger in India over the June 2020 Galwan clashes and mistrust over whether the PLA would revert to positions prior to 2020 remained External Air Forces Minister S. Jaishankar's statement that China has agreed to restore troops to pre-2020 levels and positions must be verified, but it is indeed a positive move if true. The announcement of the agreement on patrolling arrangements came just ahead of the BRICS summit in Russia, setting the stage for a possible formal interaction for the first time since 2020. The government must ensure that the next steps are carried out in as transparent a manner as possible to engineer trust in the process. The perception is that Chinese troops have occupied more Indian land than before and have denied Indian soldiers patrolling rights and villagers in eastern Ladakh access to their grazing lands. Premature exclamations of success or the chest-thumping witnessed after the 2017 Doklam disengagement are best avoided, as China has diminished its presence on the plateau subsequently. Proceeding with caution while learning from past lessons is the best way forward. The next article is West versus the Rest. The West must not tolerate terror threats in the name of free speech. In this article, the writer says that the United States and Canada have accused India of covert operations targeting individuals designated terrorists, which is embarrassing to India, its government, and its people. India has denied any involvement and stated that it is not its policy to indulge in such acts. The onus is on the U.S. and Canada to provide evidence that suggests official Indian sanction to the alleged plots. Their double standard is evident, as covert operations have been a part of U.S. strategy in European countries that are treaty allies, friendly partners, and even declared enemies. The motivations for this move remain unclear and intriguing, including India's enhanced engagement with its diaspora in the West and domestic political calculations in these countries. The facts and circumstances of the controversy indicate a continued Western insensitivity towards India's security concerns. Open calls for violence against India, threats to blow up aircraft, and public celebrations of past violence against India are being tolerated in the name of free speech. Indian missions have come under attack from Khalistan proponents in Five Eyes countries. An official Canadian report has taken umbrage at Indian media reports that are critical of Khalistan propaganda, which has little support in India. Most democracies face turmoil, calling for new norms and standards both nationally and internationally. Indian immigrants form a considerable percentage of the new citizens in Western countries, contributing to the continuing vibrancy of Western societies, but also holding the risk of conflict. The India-West partnership is critical for democracy and progress in the current century, and mutual recognition of each other's concerns and priorities is essential for this.